Hello everybody, welcome to the Global Mapper webinar for the month of November. My name is Taya Youngs, an applications specialist here at Blue Marble Geographics, and with me today is David McKittrick.
Hello everyone, and hello Taya. Thank you very much for joining us today. As you can see on the screen, the topic for today's webinar is using GPS with Global Mapper. Those of you who were with us last month would have heard my kind of cautionary spiel about what we were hoping to do this month. It is a challenging topic, dealing with something that's inherently mobile in a confined environment. If you kind of picture the scene, Taya and I are sitting in a ground floor office, so demonstrating the functionality of GPS in this situation is not without its challenges. Hopefully through some simulations that we will show you, through some screenshots perhaps, or some kind of configuration settings that we can show, you can get an idea as to how GPS works with Global Mapper. Just to clarify, we are not out in the field right now. Much as we'd like to be out driving around showing this in real time, we are sitting in the comfort of the office. Now, when we talk about GPS, using GPS with Global Mapper, there's inherently three ways in which this works. One is for real-time tracking, and we're going to simulate that, how we set up and configure a GPS receiver to show our location in real time. We're also going to talk a little bit about data collection, the transfer of data from a GPS receiver into Global Mapper, and what you can do with that data in Global Mapper. And kind of the third component is the transfer of maps and data from the application to the device itself. So in a sense, we're going to try to deal with this in a threefold approach. So that is the plan of attack.
Right, this session we are recording it, and it will be available on the website in a couple days. Before we begin, there are a few housekeeping issues to cover. All webinar attendees are in listen-only mode, so you can hear us, but we can't hear you. If you want to submit a question about today's topic, you can use the question tool on the GoToWebinar panel on the right of your screen. Blue Marble product specialists will try to answer your questions in written form as they're submitted, and will also answer some questions live as time permits.
Yeah, that's right. And also, as we say all along, that we have every webinar, we say that we have continual help available for Global Mapper users. The email address, as you'll see, is at the bottom of this slide. We'll give you that one again at the end of the session. And although it's not on this slide, I also want to put a plug in for the forum once again. Related to this topic, I know there's going to be a lot of questions about specific devices and things like that. I'm going to caution you a little bit to hold off on some of those more specific questions. The forum is an excellent resource to use for those specific questions. And again, I'll give you that information towards the end of our session today. Brings us to a couple of events coming up, Taya.
Yeah, so we're going to be flying across the ocean in December, and we're going to be at the 2014 GeoData London Showcase in London, England. And then on December 8th, we're going to be at the European LiDAR Mapping Forum in Amsterdam in the Netherlands.
That's right, and actually I'm going to both of those events. So I'm going to be taking a trip across to London, then hop, skipping, and jumping across the English Channel to Amsterdam. I should also mention, we didn't put it in the slide here, but we're also conducting a training class in London. I believe the dates are the 1st and 2nd. It's a Monday and Tuesday of the first week of December. There are still some slots available in that training class. If you're in British Isles or somewhere that you can get to the British Isles, it's a 2-day Global Mapper training class. We're going to be focusing on Global Mapper 16. So very worthwhile session if you're in that area. And again, there are still space available in that session. So, which brings us back to today, and as is customary, let's start by kind of outlining what we're hoping to show you today. By way of kind of painting a broader picture, we're going to introduce, broadly speaking, GNSS GPS. We'll talk a little bit about what the Global Navigation Satellite System is, and specifically the American version of that, the Global Positioning System. When we get into looking at the application itself, obviously going to spend most of our time in Global Mapper or a simulated version of Global Mapper. Obviously we want to talk about how you work with GPS in Global Mapper. So we'll talk a little bit about the configuration, how you can connect to your GPS receiver. We are going to be first going with that first concept I talked about, which is tracking your position in Global Mapper, rendering your location, and essentially putting yourself on the map. Your location is going to be rendered right on the map. So we'll talk a little bit about how we can track, and again, we'll show a simulation of that process. As a byproduct of that, we will show you how you can record a track log, essentially a linear feature that defines where you have been. You know, if you're driving along a highway or walking or navigating through some wilderness area, you can. We often compare this to dropping breadcrumbs behind you. Create a breadcrumb trail, a track log, and it's a linear feature. You can save that as a linear feature within Global Mapper, and I'll show you that process as we get to that section. We'll also talk about how Global Mapper can be used to collect waypoints, from simple tagging your current location to averaging multiple locations. And a little bit later in the presentation, we'll also bring up a function which some of you may have seen in some of the previous webinars, our quick point creator, which really lends itself well to this application, the idea of being able to click a button to directly place a point at your current GPS location. When we move away from actual tracking, we want to talk about how Global Mapper interfaces with GPS receivers as a standalone unit. In other words, how can we get data from Global Mapper to a device and vice versa? We'll address the issue of transfer of data. There's some very straightforward, streamlined, automated processes, but there's a lot of other file formats that would be compatible with a receiver. So we'll talk about that transfer capability. As part of that, we will address some of the formats that you can use for exchange of data. GPX is a very commonly used one. Some of the Garmin-specific formats, Loran's formats are supported by Global Mapper. So we'll introduce or bring up some of those formats. We'll show you both for importing and exporting, again, interfacing with the GPS receiver. And we're going to be addressing kind of different components of the application that tie into GPS in general. One of those that, again, many of you may have seen in previous webinars is the idea of being able to import a geotag photograph and essentially have that on the map. And I'll show you some of the functions that relate to that maybe haven't been covered in previous webinars. There are other tools in Global Mapper we'll bring up as well, time depending, that utilize the GPS signal. So that is the plan of attack. Let's introduce today's session by addressing the question, what is GNSS GPS? Well, the acronyms, first of all. Global Navigation Satellite System is kind of the umbrella technology that defines determining your position based on a satellite constellation. The version that most of us will be familiar with is the Global Positioning System, Navstar GPS to give it its full name. To give it a kind of a generic description, it's a worldwide location technology. It is worldwide. It has global coverage. It allows you to establish your position at any point on the surface of the Earth. So this system that we all use, and this is not obviously restricted to any particular geographic or geopolitical entity, but it is administered by the U.S. Department of Defense. So those of you who are within the U.S., obviously we are helping to fund the system. We are U.S. taxpayers, so our tax dollars are going to the maintenance of the GPS, the Navstar Global Positioning System. Those of you outside the U.S., well, you're welcome. Obviously, there's no requirement for you to submit your tax dollars, although I'm sure it would be appreciated by the federal government over here. But no, you have access to the system as well. It is a global system. I should also mention that it's not the only system. There are other satellite-based location systems, the Russian system GLONASS, there's a European system Galileo, which is partially operational. There are systems being developed by the Chinese government, by India, so there are other systems coming on board. Global Positioning System, which has been around, in one form or other for well over 25 years, is the one that we're most familiar with. The system itself is based on basically precise time and distance. Now, I don't want to go into too much of the technical details, and this is just by way of introduction for those who maybe haven't used GPS. Essentially, a satellite or a constellation of satellites has been configured to send a data stream that's picked up by your receiver. Now, that data stream is sent at a precise time. The difference in the time that signal was sent to the time of your receiver is used to calculate the actual distance. Now, basing the location on distance obviously would require more than one satellite. So 4 satellites will give you a 3-dimensional fixed based on a simple triangulation process. So the actual technology is fairly simple in a way, because it's a simple triangulation process to determine your location. As I said, it derives position from a simple geometric calculation. So when you turn on your GPS receiver, you're receiving communication from some of those satellites in an orbit, in a geostationary orbit. I'll show you a little graphic in a minute that shows you that in a more simple form. As I said before, the system is available to everyone at no cost. You do not have to subscribe to the system, so it is something that everyone can use. GPS technology has become ubiquitous. You're finding it more and more in everyday life. Obviously, our cars now have navigational systems that tie into the Global Positioning System. Sat-nav is what would be referred to in some other parts of the world. Phones. My smartphone sitting beside me here is a GPS chipset. Everything I do is now going to be location based. I can take photographs that are tagged to location. I can navigate with my phones. Cameras now have GPS. Survey equipment, obviously we're getting into the technical realm, also has GPS components to it. Some of the applications for GPS, most of you will be familiar with, for navigation, finding your way from point A to point B, integrating the location on a recognized road network, give you turn-by-turn directions. We've probably all done that with our phones, or maybe an in-vehicle navigation system that you have. Obviously for recreation, if you want to find your way to your favorite fishing spot, or you want to do some geocaching. Those of you who have a handheld receiver, an excellent recreational pursuit, going almost like a treasure hunt in the woods. In a more professional context, fleet management, being able to determine where your assets are located, whether they be vehicles or something that's mobile. You can track and determine where those assets are located. Obviously, for surveying and geomatics, GPS is an integral technology. Cartography, obviously in the world of cartography, location technology is also a key discipline. And the final bullet in my notes here is marketing. GPS is now being used for marketing. You walk by a Starbucks and your phone may actually prompt you with a coupon that tells you, hey, there's a special deal in Starbucks. It's location-based technology that's now being used for marketing purpose. So again, the technology is ubiquitous. Before I get into looking at the application itself, one more thing I want to bring up, and that's the need for accuracy. Depending on your application, you may need a very precise GPS receiver. You maybe need something that gives you very high-level precision in terms of accuracy. But that's not always required. If your intention in using GPS is simply for locational context, where am I in relation to my data, or how can I track myself, any off-the-shelf receiver will work in this context. So don't feel that accuracy is precise accuracy is required when you use GPS. Some of the technology is available at a very low cost.
Is there anything other than the price and quality of the GPS receiver that affects accuracy?
Well, most of the receivers you buy today, and certainly the technology has, as is typical, has the quality's improved, the prices have come down. Many of the receivers have been designed to allow differential GPS or a onboard correctional system that will typically get your accuracy down to within about 3 or 4 meters. So, and for many applications that is fine. Obviously, for survey-grade applications, that's not going to be enough.
Yeah, and it does also sometimes depend on where you're using the unit.
Absolutely.
For example, if you're using it in a busy urban area with lots of tall buildings, you might have a lower accuracy than if you're using it out where you have a super excellent view of an open sky.
Yeah, those buildings tend to reflect the signal, so you're going to get a false signal as well as the original signal. So that is a consideration. Canopy is another one as well. Here in Maine, we have a lot of trees, so obviously if we're dealing with a high-density canopy layer, it's going to restrict the signal. So yeah, that's basically an introduction to GPS. We could probably spend the rest of the hour going through GPS technology. Tea's shaking her head no here, so I think we should probably spend some time actually looking at how GPS works with Global Mapper itself. Now, I have a couple of simulations I'm going to show you here. Let me bring up the application itself first and show you a menu that while we've mentioned it in the past, and even in my training classes, I acknowledge its existence, but beyond that, I don't really delve into this component of the software. The GPS menu, as you can see here, includes quite a lot of options in here for essentially configuring your connection with the receiver and how that receiver behaves, or how the signal behaves when it's rendered on the map. What I want to look at first is this setup menu. If you have a receiver that's NEMA compliant, now NEMA is the National Marine Electronics Association, I believe is what the acronym stands for. They have developed a specification for the transfer of data. It's a standardized language, if you like. And most devices you're going to be using today will be NEMA compliant. So if you have such a device, the process of setting up a connection to Global Mapper essentially is administered right in the setup dialog box. You can establish a serial port connection with the appropriate port number, and very often if you have a USB device, you may be able to get a serial emulator that will allow your device to communicate with through a serial port connection. If you have a Garmin device, there is a dedicated option that will recognize the USB device automatically. I'm going to get into the read from file a little bit later because we're actually going to do some simulation. The other option here under format, and this is something you should try if you're having problems with that connection, if you plug your GPS device in, it just doesn't seem to be connecting, there is an auto detect option here that will do its best to detect a connected device. Now, on the device itself, you may also need to change how the interface is set up, and obviously this will depend on each individual device and you know how it operates. But the interface will very often allow you to transfer NEMA sentences, basically transfer that NEMA data through the cable to, in this case, to Global Mapper. So you may need to apply a configuration setting in the device itself. What I'm going to do right now, and this is again a quick simulation, I'm going to turn on a receiver which I have connected, and I have to say that given our situation here on the ground floor of the building, I will not get a signal. But is it a Garmin device? I'm going to select that option, and I'm going to select OK. So in your case, if you've got a Garmin receiver, exactly the same procedure. My Garmin device is now connected. If I go to GPS, I can now start tracking that device. Obviously, again, we're not seeing anything on the screen. We're not actually able to track our location. But what I can at least show you is the information dialog box that would appear if we were actually out in the field. So in the GPS menu, we can now see, in my case, it's acquiring satellites. And believe me, it's going to take a while to actually pick up a signal, given that we're 3 stories down from our sky view. But you can see this is the dialog box that would appear if we actually were out driving around. We get our connection status and then other information. I'm going to show you a recording of a driving trip I took in a few minutes so we actually can see this dialog box in a more real-world context. Let me, for the time being, stop my tracking and look at some of the other options under the GPS menu. While it's stopping tracking, there we go. You can configure how your display appears on the screen. The vessel, as we describe it, the vessel is essentially the indication of the visual characteristics of the icon that appears. You can change the color of the vessel, the size of the vessel, the shape of the vessel. So there's various options in terms of how that will physically appear. If you're working with some type of data, for instance, in my case, I've got a background of some aerial imagery, perhaps a brighter color would be better in this case. So maybe an orange color for that configuration might make it look a little bit better. So you can change some of those options in the menu here. You'll notice a couple of ones that have been added fairly recently, and that's to draw the vessel based on the current elevation shader. Those of you familiar with Global Mapper's elevation functions will know that we can apply a shader pattern to a raster layer with a Z value. The color of the shader can be applied based on your current elevation. So that's a kind of an interesting variation on a standard solid color. So again, various options for determining the visual characteristics of that display. The other thing I wanted to mention as well before we actually look at the simulation, in my toolbar, I'll just drag this little set of tools over slightly so we can see a little more clearly. In my toolbar, I have activated the GPS toolbar set. I usually don't have this visible. I had to remind myself this morning to make it available again. Given that most of my work is actually in an office situation, I'm not out in the road a lot, I don't typically have this displayed. But now that we're working with GPS, I can enable it. And you've got various quick options here for creating waypoints, displaying the information, the same dialog box I showed you a minute ago, and for averaging waypoints as well. And these will become active once I start actually tracking a GPS receiver. So it makes the process of tagging or placing a waypoint a lot more simple. So the toolbar button, if you don't have it visible, would be under the View, Toolbars, and you'll see it listed right here. Checkbox indicates it actually is being displayed. Okay, at this stage I'm going to go into simulated mode. I have a recording of a journey that I took, so to speak. Now it looks exactly the same, but this is actually a video that I'm going to play so you can see the tracking process. On your screen you should now see the progress of my cursor. And again, I'm playing a video here. This is a simulation. I drove around a few days ago, just drove up the road from our building here, right in front of our state capitol building. Some of you have seen some of our LiDAR data demonstrations. We may have seen some LiDAR for that building as well. And you can see driving around the front of the capitol building, I think I make a right turn here, and in a while actually enable the information, so you'll see what that looks like as well. So you'll notice trailing behind me is my track log. You can see I'm generating a linear feature. I'm about to turn on the information dialog box. Here we go. I have a 3D fix at this stage. My coordinates are being displayed and they're being updated in real time. Both the lat long and the coordinates based on my global system, which in this case I believe is UTM. All the other information here is my current elevation. In meters, and you'll see feet displayed here as well. If I had an elevation layer displayed, it would also give me my elevation above ground. Obviously good if you're in an aircraft or in an airborne situation. That would also be displayed in my current elevation. And my speed, you can see I'm driving very slowly. I think the speed limit here is 25 miles per hour, so you can tell I didn't actually break the speed limit. I'm getting pretty close there. And my current heading as well is indicated. So that's just a simulation of what the tracking process would look like. And I'm doing this obviously with some aerial imagery, but whatever data that I would have loaded here, I would be essentially rendering my own location, rendering my position relative to whatever data I had loaded.
Does this work to use Global Mapper directly for field data collection?
Yeah, we could certainly have collected a waypoint as we drove around. The waypoint button would have allowed us to do that, would have allowed us to tag a specific location. The other application for field data collection is to use a standalone receiver and then transfer those files. We're going to deal with that a little bit later. But certainly with Global Mapper, if you're in your vehicle and you need to tag a particular location, as I mentioned before, we have options for dropping a waypoint or for averaging a waypoint. And I'm going to simulate those a little bit later. We're going to play with those functions in a simulated environment. So that's basically the tracking process. That's how the tracking process works. Let me change focus slightly here. I'm going to bring up another location. This is, again, pretty close to our building. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to simulate a GPS feed. I'm going to simulate the location. I'm going to do that by, rather than connecting to a receiver, which I did last time, I'm going to read from a recorded log file, a NEMA file. So the file I'm going to select is what I call PADS. I'd actually simulate it myself. And you'll see, when it finishes, you'll see a little icon on the screen indicating my simulated location. So again, this is pretend mode. This is a simulated mode. But it allows me to show you, again, this is a different instance of the software, so I need to move the little toolbar one more time. Allows me to show you some of the GPS tools which are now active. For instance, my info button, I can bring that up. And because this is simulated, the information is not correct, implying I'm 160 meters above the ground, which I'm actually not. You'll see it's a 2D fix because there's no elevation involved in this, but just an indication as to the information that's being derived from the receiver. I can create a waypoint. Now, the waypoint has a button, as you can see, mark waypoint. I could also go to the GPS menu towards the bottom, mark waypoint. Control M is the keyboard shortcut. I'm going to use the button in the toolbar. And as with any digitizing function in Global Mapper, I now have the option to place that waypoint at in a defined layer, give it whatever characteristics I want, and whatever symbology if I want to override the symbology. So essentially what I'm doing is automating a digitizing process by dropping a waypoint on the map. I'm just going to cancel that because I want to show you the adjacent function, which is to average the waypoint. Now, if I click the average waypoint button, you'll notice it's giving me an indication as to many positions are being averaged and the duration. And I can keep this going for as long as I want. And when it's collected enough points, and obviously in a real-time application, when we're in the field, the GPS signal will inherently drift just a little bit just based on the technology. So obviously, the more points you average, theoretically, the better the quality, the better the accuracy of that collected point. So we're going to go with about a 25-second average here. And again, I'm faced with a dialog box for saving that waypoint and dropping it right on the map. And we'll go ahead and cancel that. So waypoint collection, waypoint creation, it's essentially an automated digitizing tool. Let me go ahead and we'll stop tracking. And I'm going to go back to our previous location again. And once again, I'm going to simulate the playback of a journey, if you like. I'm going to do that by changing the NEMA file. Let me go ahead and read a different file. And this time I'm going to talk about how we can record a track log. And again, the track log is, I described it as a breadcrumb trail. It's a linear path that's recorded as we drive along. So I'll go ahead and click OK on that. And again, we'll start tracking. You should see the little arrow again. And you'll see eventually we will start to move from my stationary position down at the bottom of my screen. I think it's a few seconds here before I actually get going. And there we go. We can see us moving around. Now, I have to say, because this is a simulated application, we don't have information on our heading or anything like that, so the arrow is pointing straight up. I have to make sure I actually have my recording of my track log. There we go. So now we're recording the track log. You can see that displayed on the map, and I'm going to pause this in just a second, and I'm going to show you how we can then save that linear feature as a line feature in Global Mapper. I'll just go ahead and stop tracking at this stage. Again, from the GPS menu, stop tracking, and I can save that track log. And again, it has a pre-configured feature type, much as our waypoints were waypoints. But I can make this whatever type of feature I want. And again, it's a shortcut to the standard digitizing functions that are available in Global Mapper, and just saving a line, essentially, in that case. Now, we often use the cooking show analogy in our webinars, and in this case, it's the same. I have a track log that I recorded previously, and I have it saved. And you can see that now displayed on the map. It's a dashed line. If I select the info button from the toolbar and select that track log, and I open the vertices for that track log, you can see how much information is recorded. And again, I have to apologize that this is a simulation, so the actual speeds are not accurate, nor is my average speed. I wasn't actually going that slow. And my heading is obviously standardized. But if this was a real-world application, you actually had a device connected, you would see all of this information for each of the points along your track. So that's track collection. Now, the other thing that we can do with that track, and this goes back to a function that we actually showed last month as a new function that's available in Global Mapper 16, is we can create a playback of that track log, essentially, using our fly-through recording functionality. I'm going to do this very quickly. For those of you who didn't have an opportunity to sit in on last month's webinar, we now have a new tool that lets you record a simulated fly-through with a line that has been created or imported. In my case, it would have been a line that was recorded. My vertices are being displayed, by the way. That's why you're seeing it with all of the dots along it. I can select the Edit Fly-Through Path button in my toolbar. This is a new button in Global Mapper 16. And you can see all the information now is pre-populated with my heading information, etc., etc., etc. So I've got all of the information from my track log now indicating where I'm located, my time, and my heading. I've got to check here. Looks like about a 60-minute duration in this track log. I'm going to go with these options. I'm going to generate my fly-through data, and I'm going to click OK. Now, if you didn't have a chance to see this function last month, typically when you're using a standard linear feature, you would have to populate these values using some of the settings below. And you can see, because this is a track log, they're inherently in the line feature itself. So I'll click OK, and I'll bring up my 3D map, my 3D view of the area, and a little bit exaggerated here. Let's bring down the exaggeration slightly so it looks a little more realistic. And I'm just going to quickly play back that track log using, again, one of the new buttons that's in the 3D window in this case, which is render our fly-through. And there you can see, based on the track log, excuse me, it's still quite exaggerated here, but you can see me now driving along the road. Believe me, the terrain is not quite that exaggerated along this road. So as you can see, the fly-through has been recorded, and we can output this to a video file if necessary. There's my sharp turn going down the hill slightly to heading towards the river. So again, that's another option you have when tracking, is to replay it in our 3D fly-through mode. Now, one final thing I want to show you, and again, I'm going to turn on the simulated tracking here. Very simple. Based on my current location, you can see my cursor again at the starting point. Simply Control L is going to copy my coordinates to my clipboard. Didn't actually see anything there, but I'm going to bring up Notepad just to verify that actually worked. And very simple way, based on your current location, keyboard shortcut Control L copies your current coordinates, and you can paste them wherever you want. In my case, I just pasted them into a Notepad file.
Can you also do this in the other direction? You've been showing a lot of really great ways to bring data into a GPS from a GPS receiver into Global Mapper, can you make waypoints in Global Mapper and then send it out to a GPS unit?
Absolutely. Obviously, we're dealing with points here, so any point feature that's generated in Global Mapper, there are multiple export options that would be compatible with the device. GPX is the one that's most common, but simple XYZ or text files would also be compatible with some receivers. So absolutely, by way of preparing for your work in the field, if you're using a standard handheld GPS receiver, absolutely Global Mapper can be used to create those waypoints. So that is certainly part and parcel of the way we work with GPS. I just hit the clear tracklog button to get rid of that tracklog, by the way. Okay, we're going to take a slight break here. We have a poll prepared. Always interested in finding out a little bit about our audience. Often in the past, we've asked which version of the software you use. Always very interesting to see, which of you are using the newest version, which are using older versions. Today, we're going to ask a different question. We're going to ask how you use GPS with Global Mapper. Now, hopefully, you're seeing the poll on the screen. Basically, how do you currently use GPS with Global Mapper? Do you use it for real-time positioning? Do you send maps or data to the receiver? Do you view process data from a receiver? Do you not currently use GPS? And do you not currently use Global Mapper? Those are your options. Now, you can choose more than one. Often our polls are limited to one response. In this case, choose all of those that are applicable. And we'll leave the poll up for just a few minutes or a few seconds, and hopefully you have a chance to answer. Again, answer all those that are applicable. Interesting results coming in here. We're actually seeing the results coming in real time. So we'll just another couple of seconds here, and we'll close the poll, and then we can turn around and share the results so you'll get an idea as to how the other attendees are using GPS. So we'll go ahead and close. And if I click this button to share, hopefully you'll see the results on your screen. So 72% of you are viewing or processing data from a receiver. So you're interested in getting data into the application from a field collected device. That is a very interesting majority of you who are in attendance are doing that. About a third of you are interested in sending maps to a receiver. And about again a little bit less are using for positional tracking as well. So interesting cross section. Many different applications of GPS. Thank you for sharing that information with us. To that end, let's talk a little bit about the input of data from a receiver. The way to get data from a GPS receiver into Global Mapper is through the standard import process. File, open data file, or we've got the folder in our toolbar. Control-O is the keyboard shortcut. I'm going to briefly stop here and show you the list of our supported formats. I have to move the dialog box slightly so we can see the full array of this list. Commonly used formats. I want to point out a couple very specifically that would be applicable when using a GPS receiver. The number of Garmin formats you'll see here, Garmin PCX5 files. You'll also notice the GPX formats listed here. GPX is the standard GPS exchange format recognized by many device manufacturers. We have GPS TrackMaker format files. We have specific files from device manufacturers such as Trimble and Lowrance. You'll see some of these in here. So multiple files, and obviously simple text files would be another option. Worst case is if you can get your data into an X and Y file format, you can certainly bring it into Global Mapper. I'm going to show a couple of simulations of working with field collected data and how you can use that type of data in Global Mapper. So many different file formats can be used. If your device supports the interface function of mass storage, you can actually browse directly to the device itself. Again, if it's the data's stored in a compatible format, for instance in GPX on your device, you can directly pull that device from a connected receiver, again assuming that your device can be set up as in mass storage mode. So you certainly have that option. Now again, I'm going to simulate this process a little bit here by showing you some files. I'm going to bring in a Waypoint file, which is actually a text file that I created. And we'll go ahead and open that. Now because this is a text file, those of you who have not seen this function, Global Mapper does not know the structure of the file by itself, so we have to tell it how this file is structured. So this is a point file. I'm going to bring in my points only. In my case, the file actually has 4 fields that I need to skip. I didn't have a chance to actually preview the file to show you what it looked like, but you'll take my word that there are 4 fields of information prior to the X and Y values. It is a tab delimited file. I need to make that specification. And in this case, I can determine what these points, when I import them, what format they're going to be in the application. I'm just going to make them towers so we can see them a little more clearly. We do not, the file does have attributes, so we want to make sure our attributes are included in there as well. Let me see what other options we have here. I don't believe I've got elevation data, but I believe I can keep that on. Oh, our first column is our header information as well. So I think these settings should work in the case of the file that I'm trying to import. Oh, no, I think I made a mistake. Let's try that one more time. That's point data. Oh, I needed to change my latitude as being my first. I indicated longitude. So my latitude is my first field. I think the other settings should be as they are. And again, click OK. Now, the final thing I need to tell Global Mapper, because of the X and Y's that were collected on my device, what are those X's and Y's? In my case, they're that long. So I can leave this as is. And you'll see right on my screen, I've got 3 locations tagged. These actually were recorded right on the device as I was driving around. And if I select one of them, you can see I've got the header information, name, the type, and in this case, my elevation. So the simple act of getting data from a receiver may be just the idea of saving it to a text file. I want to show you a slightly different scenario where we're actually going to import a GPX file. GPX is the GPS exchange format I showed you briefly in the import dialog box, and again I have an example of that file format here. And in this case, the simulation we're going to show you is the creation of an area. Now, obviously the points I'm going to be bringing in here, I'm going to turn off the labels for this so we can actually see them a little more clearly. Turn off my waypoint labels. But these were collected. I actually took a walk around, and believe me, it was raining the day I went out here, so I suffered immensely to collect this data. But I'm simulating a situation here where I want to determine the area. Perhaps I'm interested in finding out how much cultivatable area there is in a field, for instance. All I did was walk around the area, tagging points, tagging waypoints. And they come in as point features. So in Global Mapper, what we have to do is take those points. I'm going to grab them collectively. And from those points, we're going to create a line feature. And the way we do that is right-click. And under our advanced feature creation options, we can create a new line from the selected points. And the distance between points to allow connecting across, any distance is allowed if I leave 0. So that's exactly what I want in this case. The line feature is going to have its own characteristics. In my case, the line is just a bridge between generating some points and calculating area. So I'm not overly concerned about the characteristics of the line. But now that the line has been created, I can select it and close it up and make it into an area. So a new area from selected line. We're going to allow a very large threshold distance to make sure it actually closes. We'll click OK. And again, we can determine the type of area that we're generating. If I was doing maybe an analysis of fields, I could make this a field type. And we'll click OK. Now, the long and short of that is I started with points, collected on my GPS receiver, and ended up with an area. And if I select the area, I know exactly what the enclosed area is. So from my walk around the perimeter, just with a couple of data processing steps within Global Mapper, as you can see, I've got the area in square meters of this area. Let's talk a little bit about export formats now that we have some data on the screen. Obviously, depending on the type of data, and we'll isolate our points here. I'm going to turn off my user-created features, going back to my waypoints. If you have tagged locations in Global Mapper, if you have created some point features, or perhaps maybe your point features originated maybe in a shapefile, but you need to get those onto your GPS device. You need to have those as a reference going into the field. It's an export function. Export LiDAR, vector LiDAR format, and then again, many of the same GPS formats are supported in this list. GPX is the one we use a lot, so the GPX format is available, as are many of the others as well. I should also mention the CGPS mapper, those Polish MP files are supported if you're using one of those devices. Some of the LORAN's formats are available as well. And again, Garmin files as well. We've got Garmin track files and Garmin vector map files and waypoint files as well. So getting data in, getting data out, very straightforward, very simple in Global Mapper. I should also mention that as well as we've been using, obviously, points, waypoints, and track files, or we've been referencing waypoints and track files, Global Mapper will also allow data to be sent to a device that supports raster imagery. Specifically, some of the Garmin devices, the Colorado and the Oregon are two that come to mind that support the display of rasters. They support the display of imagery. You can, using the export option, as I showed you previously, export to a raster file that would be compatible. There's a couple of formats. The KML, the keyhole markup language, is supported by the Garmin devices, as well as the Garmin-specific GNX format. So if your device supports any of those imagery formats, you can export directly. Now, to make that workflow even more straightforward, there is a dedicated option at the bottom of the GPS menu to send those raster maps to a connected Garmin device. Again, not something I can easily simulate or easily show, but that is an option. If I had one of those devices connected, it writes it directly onto the device. So what you would see on your device is essentially a raster version of any data that you have currently in Global Mapper. Now, if you're interested in going out and purchasing a GPS receiver, having listened to this webinar, it would be a strong contender. One of those raster-supported devices may be one to look at because of the ability to actually simulate all of the map data that you've been working with in Global Mapper on a handheld device. So again, the Garmin devices that come to mind, the Oregon, Colorado, there may be others that have been added since, but those are certainly worth considering if you're out in the shopping for that receiver. Okay, a few other things I want to show you in relation to how Global Mapper works with GPS, and I've got to be aware of my time here. I don't want to go on too much over the top of the hour. I'm going to go back to where we were a few minutes ago, which is our more remote location. I'm going to bring up the workspace. I'm going to go ahead and we'll load it. Actually, I think I have that screen open still. Yes, I do. Here we go. So we're back in this remote location, and I'm going to do what I did before, which is essentially enable the tracking based on the file that I'd set up. Just making sure that it's still the same file, pad site in this case, and we'll click OK. And we'll start our tracking process. So again, we're simulating being in the field. We're at this location. And I want to show you a couple of things that we can use in Global Mapper that utilize or exploit the fact that we know where we're located. One that used to be a function that was only available for those of you who use Global Energy Mapper, but it's now available to everyone, is what we call our pad site placement tool. Insert pad site from library. Now I have to kind of caution you to read this description with a grain of salt, because it's more than just pad site placement. It's essentially a templating tool. A templating tool allows you to create a feature that then can be replicated at a select location. Now I'm going to click anywhere on the map. It doesn't matter where I click after having selected that option. It gives me the option to choose a pad site. There are a couple in here that are defaults. But you can also build your own library. Essentially, any of the vector formats that you use in the application can be used to generate a library. So if you're constantly mapping the same basic structure, this is an excellent tool. Again, a templating tool, if you like. Now, the default location for that site is going to be where I clicked on the map. But you will also notice I can use the current GPS location for my insertion point. So if I'm at that location, it doesn't matter where I click on the map. I simply click the OK button, and that pad site is placed right at my GPS location. So I can automate the positioning based quite specifically on where I am or where my receiver is located at that time. So that's a use of GPS within the application for assigning a template, if you like, of a vector feature. Let me actually turn that layer off because I want to show you another function that we can use. Again, one that many of you may not be familiar with. Those of you who have been in some of our webinars may have heard me mention this before, and that's our quick point creator. This is a really nice tool to use in conjunction with the waypoint collection. Under our new point features, our create point features, you'll see a menu option to bring up our quick point creator. Now, the quick point creator, as the name implies, is a way for you to accurately and efficiently place a point on the map. Rather than having to go through the whole process of determining what that feature type is after placing the point, this does this automatically for you. And you can build up your own library of points. I've got 5 in my library here, but if I click the Setup button, you can see I have the option of choosing from basically the list of point types in the application. And you can customize this. You can build your own, obviously, as needed. The process of placing a point, I can click the point and just click on the map, or I can automatically create this point at my GPS location. So if I wanted to do this, if I wanted to place a tower, for instance, at my current location, I simply click that tower icon, confirm the settings, and you'll see that based on my GPS location. I think my signal drifted just a little bit there, but you can see it's an automatic way of determining where that position is going to be, and it's again based on your precise GPS location at the point, at the time at which that button was clicked. So again, rather than going through a standard waypoint tool process, the Quick Point Creator lets you build your own library of points used in conjunction with GPS. Very, very efficient process. Let me go up to a slightly different location. I'm going to actually stop, clear my track log in this case. There we go. We're going to take a journey up the coast from where we are right now up to the coast of New Brunswick. This is St. John, New Brunswick, to show you another application where GPS will work with Global Mapper. And specifically what we're going to be talking about now is using the Rectifier. The Rectifier is a tool that lets you position a raster image, or indeed a vector image if it's appropriate, at a defined location. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up a file that is a historic map of this area. Now, the way the Rectifier works is it requires me to tag specific locations on that image and identify where those would be in the real world. And some of the simulations you may have seen of this this application have required me to identify where those locations are in an adjacent map, and that's what I have over here on the right side of my screen. But let's say that I had gone out into the field with a GPS receiver, and I had determined those ground control points, not through a manual process looking at the map, but actually collected them, maybe stood it at a street intersection and tagged a waypoint. I can use those points for my ground control points, and I can load those up from a file. I'm going to go to my load control points from file option. I'm just going to bring in a text file that I'd created, and you'll notice those points are now populated. I also simulated the position on the tagged image. Obviously that's not correct, but I can go to each point individually now. There's point 1, and zoom into my map view, my historic map, and determine exactly where that's located. Let me zoom in a little closer to point 1, see where that's located. I'm not going to take the time to do it accurately today, unfortunately, but I can now identify where that point is located, tag that point, and you'll see it updates that information. I can update the selected point, and it gives me my pixel X and pixel Y. So these projected coordinate values, these ground control points, were actually collected in the field as opposed to tagged from identifying the location on the map itself. So another application where GPS will work, as far as field collected data is concerned, within Global Mapper.
I had a question earlier from a user who says that he's working on snowmaking, and he has some geotagged photos. Is it possible to add a geotagged photo into Global Mapper?
Snowmaking. Okay, we got some interesting applications. Absolutely. I don't have a snowmaking simulation, but I can show you, based on my little field trip I took a few days ago in the pouring rain, what you can do with a geotagged photograph. Most smartphones today have a GPS chipset. Most smartphones obviously have a camera as well. And with that combination, and with the appropriate configuration established on the device or on your phone, you can embed the coordinates in your photograph. And if that's the case, Global Mapper has been configured to automatically recognize those. Now again, in the pouring rain, I took a photograph. Let me go ahead and open it. And the way you get that data in, by the way, is quite simply through the Open dialog box. We'll go to Data, Photos, and you actually can see a preview of what I took a photograph of here. You'll note that it places an icon on the screen at the location at which the photograph was taken. Now, some systems have been set up in such a way that if the direction of which the camera was facing is also noted, you'll see a little arrow indicating which direction you were facing when the photograph was taken. It should be stressed that this is not the subject of the photograph. If you're trying to tag the Capitol building here, with the camera sitting on top, it's obviously not at that location. It's where I was standing in the pouring rain when I took the photograph. Now, to access that photograph, I simply click on the button itself, and it brings up the photograph I had taken. So very simple way of cataloging your photographs simply by clicking on the map. The really interesting thing that you can do, and I haven't actually shown this in any of my simulations before, I just want to make you aware of the fact that this is an option. The interesting thing you can do with that photograph is you can actually set it up to show the photograph on the screen itself. A right-click option on a camera point gives you the choice to place the picture on the map. I can determine where that picture is going to be. I'm going to place it right down here in this area. And you'll notice it retains the dimensions of the photograph. We'll click OK. Would I create lines? In other words, do I want to give a visual clue as to where the photograph, which photograph pertains to which icon on the screen? I'll say yes. Determine what the lines look like. I'll just leave the defaults. And you'll see when my screen refreshes. Oh, I think I may have the layer turned off. Let me just check my overlay control center. Turn it back on again. There we go. Now we get these lines. I think I may delete the inner lines and leave those. So you can see now we've got the photograph. I probably should have made it a little bit larger in this case. The icon with the photograph, which is still a hyperlink. We can still bring up the photograph in our image viewer, but now we can actually place that on the map itself. And that's a geo-referenced image. In other words, when I say geo-referenced, it is tagged to a location. It will stay in that location as my map is panned. So yeah, good question, and that's certainly a supported function of Global Mapper. One final thing I want to show from the GPS menu that is very, very powerful. You'll notice an item here that we haven't looked at yet, Manage GPS Vessels. Vessels, by the way, you've got to think of in terms of vessels being a specific receiver. You'll notice this is pluralized because what this allows me to do is to set up a situation where I monitor the location of multiple devices in the application. Now, this does require a specific piece of hardware that will allow the communication from the device itself and the processing of that device. There are some manufacturers who develop these transponders that will take a GPS signal and output a single signal that can be read by Global Mapper in this case. But I could have a list of multiple devices here and be able to monitor their location in real time with a unique icon applied to each one. Now, in my case, I've only got one. I've got my main GPS device, but other devices, if they were connected through my transponder, would also be listed here, and I would see those displayed right on my screen. For each of the devices that I'm monitoring, I can specify an icon. I can specify a track display style, so I can individually monitor my fleet, if you like. Where have they been? Very easy to distinguish. I can apply a name. I can even group them. I've only got one device here, but if I had multiple devices, I can establish groups so that they're managed as a group. So very, very powerful tool. Perhaps one of the most interesting applications of this is the ability for me to set a device boundary. It's not a physical boundary. You will not bump into a wall when you get to the edge of a certain area, but by simply drawing a feature on the screen or defining the coordinate bounds, the dialog box is one you'll probably have seen before. I can define the extent within which one of my receivers can travel. If it gets beyond that boundary, a warning will pop up telling me that a certain receiver is outside of its boundary, perhaps outside of its jurisdictional area, for instance, and it will give me a warning, a pop-up warning. So in this context, Global Mapper can be used for fleet tracking and fleet management. Out of the box, you will need that hardware device and the ability for your GPS receivers to communicate with that transponder, but that data that's generated by the transponder can be easily picked up or read by Global Mapper and rendered right on the map screen. So very, very powerful function that's available within the application. And it looks like we are almost out of time. Hopefully we gave you a little bit of an idea as to some of the GPS functionality that's available in Global Mapper. And again, from the comfort of the office here, it was difficult to simulate everything that the software is able to do in the context of GPS. I do recommend, if you have a receiver, plug it in and see if you can make that connection, and then just take a drive around, and you can certainly recreate some of the scenarios that we were able to show you today. So next month, our webinar next month will be announced. I think in the next few days we're going to send out an email, so hopefully you'll get that in your inbox soon.
Hopefully we've been able to answer most of your questions today. If not, we'll follow up with you as soon as possible. On the screen, you'll see our support email address that you can use if you think of anything in the future that you want to know more about using GPS with Global Mapper.
Yeah, and then we are kind of glancing over our shoulder here and looking. There were a lot of questions in this, and folks sitting in the sideline hopefully had a chance to answer those, as Tay had mentioned. If we didn't, I do strongly recommend for GPS questions, throw your question on the forum or browse through the forum topics that are there already, and hopefully somebody with a similar device as yours will have some recommendations or some suggestions if you're having issues with connectivity or issues with compatibility or some of the on-device settings that need to be established before it will communicate with Global Mapper. Again, the forum is by far your best bet as far as that is concerned. So we are recording this. I'm just checking over my shoulder again. The record button has been pushed, so the recording of this will be available hopefully within the next couple of days. We get it processed in time. You can go back and view the presentation again, or share this with your colleagues if necessary. And again, if you want some information for those of you, and I notice 10% of you, I'm just looking at the survey results, 10% of you do not currently use Global Mapper. If you are new to Global Mapper, and we've kind of thrown you into the deep end a little bit with today's presentation, but some of the more kind of basic information about the software is available in our past webinars. Go to our webinars page. I think it's in the support menu on our website. You'll find a link to our previous webinars. We've got several dozen webinars that have been posted up there, from introduction to the software generally to working with specific data formats. Things like that are available on there. So again, feel free to expand your knowledge of the software by going to our past webinars page. Thank you for your help today, Tia.
All right, you're welcome, and thanks to all our attendees for tuning in. We'll look forward to speaking with you again at next month's webinar.
Thank you.